Welcome to the Arabian Traveler Poetry. This is your host, Mohammed Bader, aka the Arabian Traveler. With me today is Grace El-Khal. Grace was born in Portland, Oregon. She just completed her first year at Lewis and Clark College School, aspiring to be a voice and advocate for all Middle Easterners alike. At age 12, she watched the Syrian War unravel before her eyes. It broke her spirit and soul, leaving her in search of home. As a Syrian American, she hopes to be the voice for those silenced by the conflict consuming their homelands in the Middle East.
Standing on a marble balcony, I stare at a lit city. For a second, the war did not exist. For a second, I hear honking horns and neighbors laughing at the sound of sunflower seeds cracking beneath their teeth. For a second, I grin at the thought of growing into my age. For a second, I stand still at peace. For a second, it was as if I was the only person who knew of it all. The war, the laughter, the weight, and for a few seconds, that was enough.
Wow, right?
My mother fortunately recorded it. This is it in Arabic.
10 ثواني واقفة على شرفة من الرخام أحدق بالنظر على مدينة مضاءة للحظة كأن الحرب لم تكن هناك للحظة أسمع أبواق السيارات وزماميرها والجيران يضحكون مع صوت بذور عباد الشمس وهي تتكسر تحت أسنانهم. لثانية ابتسمت لفكرة نضوجي مع العمر. لثانية وقفت ساكنة في سلام. للحظة كان الأمر كما لو أنني الوحيدة التي تعرف حقيقة كل شيء: الحرب، الضحك، والحمل المتعب. وبهذه الثواني العديدة كان الأمر كافياً.
ممتاز. Welcome, Grace. I'm really delighted to have you. مرحبا، كيفك?
Miha, thank you for having me.
Great. I'm glad I listened to you read poetry at the Arab American Heritage Month, and it was very deep and very touching. It was very emotional, and I see the connection that you have to the homeland, Syria. So I wanted to have you introduce yourself a little bit, talk about who you are and what prompted you to write your book, and tell us your book's name is The Sorrows That Bury Us.
Yes. Thank you for having me and giving me the platform to share my story, first and foremost. I am Syrian American. I was born in the United States, born and raised, but I learned Arabic before I learned how to speak English. I am very proud of my Syrian heritage. I travel to Syria every summer. I have lots of family still there back home.
It's great. Which part of Syria?
My mom's from Damascus, and my
Uh-huh.
dad is from a tiny village in Wadi Nasara
Uh-huh.
called Amar al-Hassan. And
Okay, great. Yeah, yeah.
lots of family. My grandparents were from Syria, born and raised there. And I fell in love with everything about my culture, my roots. I call it my home, even though I was born and raised in the United States. When I was 12 years old, the Syrian War started, and it was very devastating for my family.
Mm-hmm.
It imprinted on me, and at a very young and impressionable age. In the United States, Syria was known by very far and few people.
Mm-hmm.
When the Syrian War started and the news was flooded by violent images back home of the war that was tearing apart the country, it put a lot of shame into me. It made me feel helpless at a time where I didn't really have my opinions and my voice, and I wanted to help in any way I could. So I created platforms in my school communities where I raised money for Syrian immigrants, refugees, Syrians back home. And I found solace in poetry. So, in the work that I would write, I finally found the space where I could mourn and put that grief in words.
That
And
is great. Yeah, that's exactly. I've done that in 2011. I'm Palestinian, and I wrote the book that called The Traveler, and it was a way. I was reading a little bit about your bio and why you wrote it, and it resonated for me as a Palestinian. So I thank you for doing that too. It connects us together.
thank you for sharing your story. Your work is remarkable, and it really truly takes us on a journey of hope and discovery. And when I just this last year, I was in a transition in my life with my education, and I sat with my parents, and through all the work and advocacy work I had done, I saw the collection and culmination of the work that I had written, and I truly thought of taking the next step of publishing it and sharing it with the world, because it's not just my story, it's the story that we all share as a community and as a people, all Middle Easterners alike who have experienced their countries being torn apart by war. It's a story of grief, sorrow, shame, and searching for the places that we call home, especially when they transform. So When I wrote The Sorrows That Bury Us, that's how I came with the title. The collection was not organized in any particular order. I wanted anyone at any point in time to open the book and just every page holds a memory or an emotion for them to read it and connect with it. And when I was thinking of the title, The Sorrows That Bury Us, I found it very fitting that it truly, these are the pieces that we have buried or the things that we find ourselves buried in.
Yeah, no, I thumbed through it, and uh, it's amazing how sometimes as a human beings we have similar thoughts and similar ideas. I know I've written a poem called "Cross the Border," and I believe I saw one there where you talked about somebody kind of being worn out. They crossed the border, just came in, and they were just exhausted, did not care what was going on.
Yeah.
And it's just the humanity. And I just listened to a very young Palestinian poet last week, and she had written this other poem about being satisfied, and I'm like, wow, I wrote a poem called Satisfaction too. So it's the it that's what brings us together, is that common grief. And
Yeah.
one poem I thought I liked, and then I'm gonna have you read later, but there was one that was called Death Note, and I was just like I was uh, mesmerized by that one. That I hope that maybe you can read it with your own voice for us. But I know that you may also want to read some of your poetry, and maybe you want to read me like one you liked, and tell me about, why do you like it, and what does it convey and communicate.
Right. Thank you so much. Here, let me open to one of the poems, the first poems that I wanted to read. It's a little bit longer, but it's more of a prose poetry storyline.
That's okay. I tend to write long poems too. That's fine. Uh,
Uh, this is called Her Last Day in Paradise. Light flickers from a bulb encased in ash, from a ceiling tattered and cracked by the echoes of explosions on the roof. The kettle whistles, a dented piece of steel, silently sitting near a brewing flame, the only source of light in a room of darkness. The stitches on her linen sheets dance in the flames as flickers, the thread work of grandma worn by age. She sits at the couch's edge, unwilling to sink into its depths, afraid she will drown in memory she tries to burn. But the blaze is never large enough to expunge them. In seconds, dawn breaks, glistening her face in a dusted room, wafting in scents of people she lost. The window distorts the view of a world on fire, burning to crisp, streets lined in jasmine, bells chiming in prayer, laughter ringing in air. In the center lies a hole, a perfect circle encompassed by veins, home to a bullet that grazed her cheek 1 month earlier. Now the kettle screams, but it's drowned out by sirens from abroad. This time she walks to her tiled bathroom, sticky with piss she was too numb to wipe. She covers her ears and curls into her thighs as she slides into a damp corner, cradled by two walls, bracing as her world rattles and shakes. The kettle's water boils dry, Grandma's stitches whisper. People's screams fill the air, too heavy with smoke to breathe. And she was never seen again.
Wow, that's and that's the case, unfortunately, with war.
Yeah,
Like a lot of we miss a lot of people. A lot of people leave. When you went to Syria, when was the last time, and how was it, and what was the mood like?
yeah. Last time I went to Syria was last summer. I know in December, January, that was when the president fled the country. There was a government overthrow. So I was in Syria right prior to that major transition. It was a very difficult time. It was a time where the war on paper was over. There was no longer a war that was going on, but there was still problems going on. There was a major economic crisis, expense and major inflation that civilians were struggling with. Especially in different parts in Syria, you can see how other parts are more hardened relative to other areas that experienced less killing, less
Uh-huh.
civilian deaths. It's very difficult. The things that made you fall in love with the Syrian culture and people are the very things that died as a result to war. The hospitality, the trust, the kindness, the humanity and humility that you used to find in people. It's devastating, truly witnessing the deterioration of the human spirit, the loss of hope. A lot of individuals who were able to flee the country as refugees, as students, as families, they're rebuilding in a new nation that they now need to call home. And other people remain in Syria, but they have nothing. They have nothing. They have no hopes or aspirations as workers, as people trying to create livelihoods and feed their families. And that particular poem that I just read, Her Last Day in Paradise, it was inspired when I had visited my cousins who live in a country, in a village next to my father's village, but live in Damascus, my mom's home. I traveled with them back to their home in Damascus, and coming into their home, their windows have holes in them,
Mm,
veins
like
that
bullet holes, you mean?
and they told me stories of, when bombs were dropping heavily in Damascus, these sirens would go off and they would have to go to their bathroom and sit on their bathroom floors just waiting for the bombs to finish. It was very interesting as a US citizen born
Uh-huh.
and raised in the United States in a life of privilege, hearing a story like this and seeing someone so unaffected as they're recalling that story, and it impacted me a lot. It had a strong impact on me. So that night when we were sleeping, I sat and I wrote that poem, Her Last Day in Paradise. This idea of not just recalling their story, but a similar story of a girl at home alone, just sitting in a house echoed with memories of people she lost, just of things that are slowly fading, and the loss that comes with it. So
Wow. Very very moving. Um, and something I sense like when you travel, something happens to your soul. Well, how do you feel yourself after seeing that?
you it's almost like you meet past versions of yourself. You become in touch in parts with your soul especially for me when the war happened. I hadn't traveled to Syria for so long.
Uh-huh.
Remember the first time I traveled back, I wrote a lot of my work, and my book shares what it's like to encounter that past,
Yeah, yeah.
to encounter older versions of your soul and the things that made you who you are, that you left back in that country.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But you also see how people changed. It's almost like you come back trying to find those parts of your soul, but they've somehow grown
Uh-huh.
time that you weren't there
Yep.
to cater to them, to feed them, to grow with them. And I wrote a lot about that experience. But you also find new parts of your soul. You find the parts of your soul that were grown, that were forced to mature because of war and grief and the trials that you faced.
Yeah. You have so much wisdom. And it, it's amazing. I had written a poem about the Palestinian children,
Yeah,
and I think in one of the poems I kind of mentioned that these kids became older
yeah,
before its time, and war and conflicts, it just forces you to move past childhood and
right,
young adulthood and just into like almost older
right.
age. And so I appreciate the wisdom. I know you're a very young person. You are finishing, you're working on a law degree, I
Yes,
understand. And
yes,
so
yes.
I just very proud of you. Yes,
Thank you very
we need
much.
that for the Arab American community here.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, for our listeners, we are in Portland, Oregon here with
Yes.
Grace El-Khal. She is an amazing poet, and I like to hear some of your. Let's talk a little bit before we hear. Um, you wrote the book again for our audience to know. It's called "The Sorrows That Bury Us" by Grace El-Khal, and I believe it's on Amazon. And where else can you find it?
As of now, it's only available on Amazon,
Mhm,
and aside, I sell it by hand at
mhm.
community events that happen. Yeah.
And you do give the proceeds from this to charity, I understand. And so
Yes.
I'd like for folks to support you and
Yes, please.
support your cause. Can you, as you mentioned that maybe your mom, you translated some of your poems and your
Yes.
mom read some of them. Maybe we can try and listen. You would first start it in English and then we'll listen to it in Arabic.
Perfect. This is actually one of the poems that you were mentioning before earlier. It's called Already Dead, and it describes someone crossing a border.
Righty. Well, I must have figured out that was really very moving poem. Thank
Thank
you.
thank you. Here it is. It's called Already Dead. I crawled, crawled, and crawled. I inched the span of 7,000 miles. I turned my eyes to the sky and saw a waving flag, one different than my colors, but nonetheless, it was waving. I think it was waving for me. I tied my tongue and soaked the olive out of my skin. I crossed the border, staring back at the skeleton of who I was. At least I am standing. That skeleton is still crawling. And
Wow. Yeah.
fortunately, my mother helped me translate it, and this is Already Dead in Arabic.
لكنه كان يرفرف على كل حال. أظنه كان يرفرف من أجلي. عقدت لساني وغسلت الزيتون عن جلدي. عبرت الحدود أحدق وأنظر إلى هيكل عظمي يمثل ما كنت عليه. على الأقل أنا واقفة الآن. ذلك الهيكل العظمي لا يزال يزحف.
Wow, it's actually very powerful in Arabic.
Yeah.
It's
And
amazing. رائع جدا. Uh, for your mom, great job, great voice. And
you,
you translated it yourself, or did your
no,
mom?
no, my mom translated it. In fact, I bond with her a
Uh-huh.
lot because my mom is a very beautiful poet in Arabic.
MashaAllah. Yeah, I have to talk
And
to her. She's
oh, she's so talented. And I told her even in the future, I'd
yeah,
love to publish both of our works
yes.
together, but she translated it and herself.
Yeah, it's amazing. I do a lot of translations and read, and um I think I can visualize the skeleton as she read it in Arabic, which we call al-Haykal al-Azmi, and it's she brought it to life. So
I
shukran.
course, thank you. I
Yeah.
was very blessed to have her translated. It's very hard
Uh-huh.
to capture the beauty when you translate it.
Yeah.
And I find poetry more beautiful بالعربي when you read it. It's more,
It sounded really very good بالعربي. كانت منيحة جيدة جدا يعني.
yeah.
Um, well, let's see, like, what else would you like people to know about your poetry? And any other poem you like to read for us in English?
You. What I would like people to know about my poetry, even though I wrote it about the Syrian experience and the hardships I faced, the way that I designed it was I want anyone who has experienced war, grief, or conflict in any capacity to read the work and find themselves in it. I designed it and I created it almost as catching fireflies in a jar. It's fleeting moments and emotions that we all have that they can all relate to, whatever those emotions may be, whether or not even if we fully understand them. And I encourage other people to share their work with the world. In publishing my work, I have met extraordinary people, yourself included, of people who have inspired me to write more work and people's whose voice need to be heard. I just encourage people to find empowerment in writing their story, especially when you feel like your power has been stripped from you. So if there's anything for people to know, that would be it. And I think to close it off, I'd read this one last poem in English. It's called Lips Dripping of Politics. Tell me when it ends, when the war cease, when the finger is pointed at someone to blame, when the men in power take accountability for the blindfolded men holding guns. When the millions of numbers on the page are given their names, when a price is attached to the stripped childhoods and robbed lives, when it all disappears, this hell we have created. If you can't tell me when, tell me why I deserve this life and others do not, why I wake to intact buildings as they skip amongst rubble, why I sleep to the sound of silence and them to bombs, why I pray for happiness and others pray for another day of life. If you can't tell me why, please tell me when politics end, when the cycle is broken, when there is a good enough reason for all of these mistakes, when the last shot is fired, when the last life is taken, when a country breathes air rather than smoke and falling ash, when we say no more, when we find the humanity we buried in trenches with children, when borders melt away like ice, when we share meals with children we have orphaned, when we aspire to be more than what we are now. The irony is, no one can tell me anything.
Oh, that is amazing. You know, I don't know if you know Mahmoud Darwish.
Mm,
Um, Mahmoud Darwish wrote a poem called لا شيء يعجبني.
mm,
Nothing pleases me.
mm.
And it sort of ends sort of like how you ended your poem. And I know I said like you've got the soul that you've, so I see a lot of reincarnations in you from like lots of different
You.
poets there.
And that's the beauty is
Mhm,
we all echo are the same sentiments. It's
mhm,
almost as if we share the same voice. I
mhm.
love Nizar Qabbani's work and Khalil Gibran,
Yeah,
major inspirations of my writing. And I found, I found my voice through them, through their work.
yeah. I mean, Nizar Qabbani, my God, he's got
Yeah,
um, he had like written a wonderful poem in Arabic that was talking about how the the problem with the Arab world, unfortunately, is that we نقاتل بمنطق الرأي والربابة التي لم تقتل ذبابة. And that's from Nizar Qabbani. It's at a lot of times we fight with rhetoric and uh, we do have a really great opportunity though to
yeah,
reach the European and the American world through art and literature.
right.
And people like Gibran, amazing. Gibran was influenced by Rodin. If you go to the Maryhill Museum, you'll see the work of Rodin. And I was looking at the work of Rodin. I'm like, wait a minute. I read The Prophet, and some of the pictures and the sculptures, some of the paintings that Gibran did looked a lot like Rodin's. And so, as you were talking, again, I was reminded of William Blake and Gibran. Gibran read William Blake 100 years later than when Blake passed. And Gibran sat at a park bench somewhere in Europe. I can't remember if he was in France at the time, and couldn't put the book down. And
Yeah,
he felt as if their souls were reincarnated.
right.
So they both talked about similar things, opposite attractions, attraction and repulsion, love, hate, all that kind of stuff. And hearing you, I can see like as you talked about, you went to Syria and you felt that it's part of your soul. And so
Yeah,
there's like that we call it also collective unconscious in Jungian psychology. So it's like it seems to me like you were able to get in touch with your roots and with Syria. um, and I think let's end by, Syria, the greater Syria was all of the
right.
Levant, like it was
Right.
like Palestine, it
Yeah.
was, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria. That was the greater Syria. When Gibran talks about Syria and leaving, when the early Arabs migrated in the 1800s, they were
Yeah.
leaving the greater Syria.
Right.
I
And
really,
a lot of pride
yeah,
being to that large of roots, especially as it's going to change and transform over time.
I am glad that you um, are proud of who you are, and a lot of younger Arab American youths and young adults are really feeling proud, and that gives me a great hope
Right.
for us as people. And I just want to encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. Um, I will look forward for your second book and other readings. It's very inspiring,
Thank
and look forward to also meet your mom and uh, listen to her poetry and
thank
so
and thank you for giving me the platform to share
yeah,
this.
you're welcome. You're most certainly welcome.
This poem is called 10 Seconds. Standing on a marble balcony, I stare at a lit city. For a second, the war did not exist. For a second, I hear honking horns and neighbors laughing at the sound of sunflower seeds cracking beneath their teeth. For a second, I grin at the thought of growing into my age. For a second, I stand still at peace. For a second, it was as if I was the only person who knew of it all. The war, the laughter, the wait, and for a few seconds, that was enough.
Wow. Great.
My mother fortunately recorded it. This is it in Arabic.
10 ثواني واقفة على شرفة من الرخام أحدق بالنظر على مدينة مضاءة للحظة كأن الحرب لم تكن هناك للحظة أسمع أبواق السيارات وزماميرها والجيران يضحكون مع صوت بذور عباد الشمس وهي تتكسر تحت أسنانهم لثانية ابتسمت لفكرة نضوجي مع العمر لثانية وقفت ساكنة في سلام للحظة كان الأمر كما لو أنني الوحيدة التي تعرف حقيقة كل شيء الحرب الضحك والحمل المتعب وبهذه الثواني العديدة كان الأمر كافياً.
ممتاز. What's your mom's name so we can give her credit for that reading?
فاتن El-Khal.
فاتن ما شاء الله شكرا.